All right, everybody, welcome to the Talent Insights podcast, special edition, the Hirewell Data Insights, hiring trends for Q4 2022, which all you loyal followers know we're going over Q3 data. Brought to you by Hirewell and Sourcewell. Joining me is a man of many words or few words, depending on the day, CEO of Hirewell, Matt Massucci.
Hey, James, thanks for having me.
Yeah, came up with that one right now. I can't tell if this is a many words day or a no words day, but we'll see. I never can tell with you.
Depends on the topic.
All right, so we're going to go over the Hirewell Data Insights for the last quarter. So we've got quite a few new takes. I think I felt like the last few shows were just a bit repetitive because like things kept going up, and maybe the last show we started to see things plateau, but we definitely saw some new things this time. So why don't you kick us off here? What are we kind of seeing now?
Yeah, agreed. We first started doing this probably like a year and a half ago. I think we've done 6 or 7, and yes, it was kind of a straight line up. Everything was just hiring. People are going crazy. When we last talked, I think we filmed the last one. It was a Q2 recap. I think we filmed it kind of early August. We can officially say that hiring peaked in Q2. I think May is sort of when we saw it. This is kind of like the Fed announcing a recession, 6 months after we've been in one and everybody knows it. So it's kind of the master of the obvious. But yes, hiring did peak in Q2. May was kind of the top of the market. We definitely saw softness in Q3. And kind of the two key things we saw happen. We've got this, our on-demand recruiting practice made up of outsourced recruiters. It's kind of a real bellwether of kind of what's happening in hiring. So we really saw like a slowdown there in June and July. Interestingly, so it did rebound, kind of shortly after. But I think that was sort of the first wave when companies started to freak out, saying, "Oh gosh, like what's happening?" They've paused hiring. Clearly, if you have an outsourced engagement, the beauty of an outsourced engagement is you can potentially pause it, and that's one of the things we play up to clients, and sure enough they did. But we've seen that start to rebound a little bit. The other thing we saw is just kind of on our search practice, we saw a decrease in openings back in June and July. It was roughly a 30% drop at the time. Some of it felt seasonal, right? Summer can be a little bit of a slow time in hiring, and combining that summer slowdown with kind of the uncertainty, and without a doubt there's a factor to it. But again, I think the interesting thing on both is there was, while there's like this 30% decline in the number of openings that we saw, we did see a rebound in August, September, and in October. They're still down from where they were the first 5 months of the year, but it's probably down 10 to 12%. So that's kind of where I'd say it's at, is things are not at their peak, but kind of 10 to 12% down seems to be kind of the average we're seeing.
I have a bit of a theory on this too, but we'll save that for the end, because I actually brought in some sales data, which I promised everyone last time, even though that project is still getting off the ground. But continue. I don't want to throw you off your game.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And yeah, we've got all kinds of theories. The other big takeaway was, being as diversified as we are and having, effectively like 6 practices. Some groups still were really strong. Some were hit a little bit harder. I think the most interesting one, kind of a microcosm sort of for what happened in the world, but also kind of where we see right now is our sales recruiting practice. So they'd had a monster first half of the year, and really saw kind of a little bit of rockiness in that July-August period. And it's pretty easy to attribute kind of why they dipped, and then kind of where we saw the rebound from. The nature of our client base, it's very diverse, but there's a pretty heavy emphasis on tech, SaaS, kind of these high growth series, A through, C organizations. And that was an area that was really, kind of impacted the most. The dip they saw was kind of the early part of the quarter, and where they saw a really big uptick was in more non-traditional, very non-tech areas, logistics, supply chain, manufacturing, anybody, looking to hire, sales or business development folks in those areas has really kind of offset very much of that. So it's a little bit of a rotation in kind of what companies are hiring, but it's definitely kind of fascinating to watch.
I was having a conversation on this exact topic like a week ago with another recruiter who works entirely in tech and he's not diversified at all in other areas. And his takeaway was like a Series A firm seem to be doing better than Series B and C. And is that what I'm seeing? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like we've got other things with the other parts of the economy doing so well, like it's almost silly to kind of split it when you're still talking about kind of tech firms. But yeah, it's the supply chain function here has been still growing like gangbusters, and the fact that that's people have to be reminded that there are other industries out there and people sell other things besides software. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And I think it is partially the size. I think it's also kind of where they're at in their runway, right? And so I think a lot of these later stage companies, like they're trying to go public and the calculus has changed for them, right? Where like all of a sudden, the stock market cares about your earnings, they care about a path to profitability, and these places didn't have it. They overhired and they really had no sort of need to kind of be able to actually make money, and then whoops, things change. And so I think there's some of that. I think where we've seen it is it's really kind of where they're at in their funding cycle. Like, sure, if they're already profitable, then great, they're doing well. Or if they recently did a raise and they've got plenty of money in the bank, like that's a really prime opportunity for that organization to hire and take advantage of the talent out there, because you're not competing with the big players, right? Like there's no doubt, like in Apple's earnings yesterday, I forget how they put it, like they're not doing a hiring freeze, but they're being very deliberate about their hiring. And I think that's sort of what, we see kind of across the board, especially these bigger tech companies. So, yeah, I guess the next piece, is our marketing function. Interestingly enough, like that in past kind of slowdowns has sometimes been hit harder, but we actually saw that group up quite a bit, from Q2 to Q3. I don't know if it's just a fearless leader, Dawn, who she's able to kind of navigate waters, but it's
either Dawn Maragos being the greatest recruiter ever, which she probably is, or it's also maybe the rest of the world's getting a little smarter about this whole growth thing and realizing that like modern marketing and demand gen is better bang for your buck than hiring a giant sales team if you're trying to like run profitable business development. I don't know, could be both. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Like the concept of 50, BDRs, or kind of a well-oiled marketing machine. Yeah, I think it's an interesting take, and it's hard to argue. So then next, if we think about like our human resources or talent acquisition practice, again, like if you had told me there'd be a slowdown, that would be the area I'd be most worried about. And, it's interesting because we've talked endlessly about the trend in recruiter hiring, how for the better part of 18 months it was just on fire. I think last year Hirewell placed 100 corporate recruiters. We saw salaries spike 37% as the year went on. First half of the year was still gangbusters, and it dropped. That was probably the single biggest area where the number of recruiter hires we did dropped 70% in Q3. The interesting thing is like their practice was their overall, kind of slowdown was that same number I've talked about, that kind of 10-12%, because they've really seen an uptick in HR leadership roles, process roles, HR business partners. Again, it's an interesting trend.
Yeah, I talked about this on our quick plug, our Hirewell weekly audio chat for everyone out there. So we'll see if this is still going on in another quarter, but LinkedIn now has the Clubhouse function. So we've been doing it once a week on Fridays, usually around 10:30 Central, where we grab one of the leaders in the organization to kind of talk, and then people can join us. So we had a lot of kind of questions and answers and stuff like that. So Rosanna Krug, who runs our HR practice, she joined us and was talking about this. Mentioning generalists are really kind of the biggest in-demand area, followed by total rewards people, which is kind of a huge flip-flop, as you mentioned, from years past, where it's always been recruiters. Recruiters has typically always been the number 2 most filled role we've done at Hirewell, behind like software developers. I mean, and who knows, maybe that change is still the case this year. And it's all those like manufacturing companies, supply chain companies, other more traditional industries that need, they're building out new offices, new facilities, need to have HR leadership and HR generals kind of running those facilities, which is, it's a good shock, surprising, but it's also positive to see that these kind of like new positions or these are the new positions people are hiring for, and that HR is still kind of a growing area in some respects. So.
Yeah, it's good to see. And I think the other, that group did, multiple CHRO searches in that quarter, which is, we've always done it, but it was a higher, higher proportion than in the past, which was exciting to see. I mean, we obviously, those are the ones we love working on, but it also shows that companies seeing the value of people and talent, and getting kind of their right leader to help, kind of set the direction going forward. It's just, it's more important now than ever, which is not shocking. So. So the next area is, I talked a little bit before about our on-demand recruiting practice, right? RPO is what other places call it. We hate the term RPO, so that's why we don't use it, but we call it on-demand recruiting. And so outsourced recruiting, again, it can be giving us the entire function. It can be utilizing our recruiters in an embedded model where they operate kind of as an extension of their recruiting department. But as I mentioned, we definitely saw, like in July, I was definitely concerned. We saw a drop and I'm like, oh shoot, like what's going to happen? But there's been a pretty steady stream of projects since. I think once companies realize, hey, we still need to hire, we may not know how long this is going to go. So it makes sense to use more of this, fractional or sort of on-demand model to manage hiring spikes.
I think they're all listening to the 10-minute talent rant is what's happening. All the talks we've had about not just hiring and firing recruiters. If you have a spike, why don't you just find a partner for it who knows how to deliver? So it's catching on. I know you tune in every week.
Maybe they are. It's exciting. And then, I guess the last two things. Our real estate practice has been, it's not in the show notes, I'm going to go a little ad lib here, but but our real estate practice has been really strong too. And that was an area where I thought I wasn't sure what to expect there. They tend to operate in the, a lot in, Texas, Florida, Sun Belt, mixture of multifamily, not doing a lot of office, but, multifamily self-storage, kind of variety of things that is kind of still going, kind of guns a-blazing, lots happening there. So that's been an interesting one too. And then lastly is our tech practice. Obviously that's the biggest function at Hirewell. It's kind of what we've done for 20 years. And I think it's always like the best, it's always what I pay the most attention to, because I think it's what we see the most of and what we kind of sort of, look at and feel. And so, again, like I keep talking about that kind of 10 to 12% drop that we saw, that's pretty much what it looked like in our tech practice. But again, when we talk tech, that's digital product roles, kind of functional roles plus engineering. So, again, we saw that 12% dip there. But then when you just strip out just down to the engineering hiring, it was barely down at all, right? I think it was down, 4 or 5% in terms of the number of engineers that we saw hired. I think it was, we pretty consistently, place, 50 to 60, a quarter of software engineers. And again, it was down a little bit from the previous one, but not tremendous. But, another interesting thing that we also do track the average salary for those folks. And again, this isn't saying the average salary for software engineers, but is the average salary for all the people we place. And for the first time in, I think, 6 quarters, we did see a decrease there, going from the average engineer salary from 150K to 139K. So interesting, and kind of I think a sign that like there's not this upward race and kind of race to the top and what you have to pay in total comp to bring on engineers.
Yeah, never thought I'd see the day. Thought it was nothing but straight up. Anyways, so let me transition a minute here, since the last show, those of you who tune into all these shows probably remember something from 3 months ago, like it's yesterday. I was talking about like I can get more sales focused data to talk about kind of what we're kind of bringing in. Of course, I didn't expect our data provider to cut off recruitment services, and we have to kind of redo the whole thing and redoing a whole RevOps plan. But we're in the middle of that, and we found a better one, so it actually worked out pretty well. But it's not all set up yet. But I didn't want to come empty-handed to this show. So I guess further answering the question of kind of like what has demand looked like from a hiring perspective. And I look at agency sales, I think, as a function of when companies really struggle, or, there's a couple of reasons why companies might pull back on how much they spend on agencies. One might be like, they're not hiring as much, but the other one might be like they're really tight on money and they're not going to start using agencies until they know they have to. So there's maybe some reluctance, but I've been tracking the amount of net new clients we have per quarter. And when I say clients, I mean actual companies that pay us, not just sign a contingent agreement and they're not actually clients. These are actual, whatever. There has been a reduction in terms of net new, but I think I honestly like last Q3 to Q1 or to Q1 this year was like the high water mark. That was where like I think we were at the absolute peak. So I don't know if it's even fair to say as a pullback, but Q3 2022 compared to Q3 2021, about 17% less net new clients we had. And then comparing Q3 to this past Q3 to Q1, which was I think the high water mark, was about 25% less. So there has been kind of in terms of companies hiring or companies coming to us when they need to hire, it's definitely been down a bit. It was fairly flat between Q2 and Q3. So this isn't like really a new trend. But the other thing that was interesting on the flip side is that I've also looked at our metric. I don't know if I want to throw that exact dollar amount out there, but we have a metric which we consider large clients, like a large engagement, what that looks like. Through 3 quarters this year, just Q1, Q2, Q3, because we're currently in Q4, it's up 44% versus all 4 quarters of last year. So like, while yes, we had, I mean, Q1 was huge, but even still, like while things have kind of tapered down, it does seem like there are more companies doing larger initiatives. Like there's still companies doing large initiatives, potentially more so than last year. So my theory is that like there are still companies doing lots of hiring, they need to do lots of things, which is why we haven't seen a complete like slowdown. But the companies that have 1 or 2 hires, smaller engagements, those are the ones that either kind of pulled things back or trying to do things more internally, at least for the time being.
Yeah. I don't do as many sales or client calls as you, but I do some here and there. And especially the last quarter, like it's the same question. Like, like I'm oftentimes talking to like a senior business leader who maybe doesn't necessarily do a lot of hiring, or they're a little bit removed from it. And they always ask the same question, like, how's the market? Like, what are you seeing? And it kind of sums it up. The one I was actually on just earlier today is that exact conversation. Like, listen, you can't post a job, and these guys, we're hiring software engineers, need to hire, 10 or 12 software engineers. You can't post a job and just expect you're not going to get, hundreds of great resumes. Like there's not a lot of great, engineers who are just dying to look right now. The biggest advantage, and I think it sort of kind of goes along the point you're talking about, is if you are able to hire now, you just have, for the first time ever, you have an advantage where you're not competing with these huge tech companies with these unlimited budgets and these inflated stock prices that can just throw so much total comp at someone that you can't keep up. So, where we've seen some nice projects come through have been just more traditional companies. We're working with large financial institution that needs to go through a digital transformation and desire 30, 40, tech and digital folks. And it's a great time for them. So they've got a good story to tell. Now, if they were trying to tell it 6-9 months ago, it'd be tough because like, is that what people want to do? But then people realize, well, shoot, like my equity in Meta isn't what it once was. And, and maybe, and I hate to laugh about that, but maybe there are more important things. Maybe working for a company that actually has real earnings, has a real business that's continue to grow and sees the value of technology. Like they've got a good story to tell. And there's more and more of those popping up. So
I do. Yeah, we turn this on a stock market conversation we want to, but I do wonder what's going to happen to, like, for the last couple of years, long-term incentives and stock options and stuff like that have really like carried the way for a lot of organizations to be able to hire. It's just so lucrative is when people see like other people they know who have just made tons of money off the stock. But now it's the opposite, where people have options and all of a sudden it's worth like half of what it was before. Like, what's the motivation to stay when things kind of take a dive that hard?
Yeah. Well, the thing, like, I don't know when this trend started. It's been a couple of years, but like the big tech companies will talk total comp, especially when they're talking engineers. And the total comp for, these principal engineers could be 400K, it could be 600K. Now, granted, that's a combination of a base, bonus, and equity. And, and I'm just sort of fascinated. Like I appreciate why they do that, because they make it a nice round number and kind of lump all these things together to make it sort of apples to oranges. But how does that work now that the stock's down 30 to 50%? Like, if it's grants, fine, it doesn't really matter. If it's options, it sure does. So like it's just an interesting time. And yeah, like I said, I think it's for companies who have more traditional businesses, because listen, it's not like these places didn't have folks in technology, or maybe they didn't have enough and they were relying on consultants, and they're recognizing, hey, we can actually hire full-time talent and bring these folks in and make a difference. So it's definitely a big trend we're seeing. Yeah, and I think like we always wrap these things up. What does the future look like? I don't know. I wish I had an answer. I do not. I made the joke, like, I was watching CNBC yesterday. I was curious, because like all the big tech companies did earnings this week, right? And as you said yourself, like Meta's went out and like that ended up not even being a bellwether anymore, because everybody's just unfortunately
Meta's done. Yeah, it didn't, when their stock tanked, it had almost no effect at all on the market. And usually when one of the big FANG stocks like tanks or takes off, it like has an immediate impact on the futures market, and no one cares anymore about what happens in Meta. They still care about Apple, they still care about Microsoft and Google and Amazon, but Meta's the odd man out, and I think they're done.
Yeah, and those other four all released, and Apple's were pretty good, kind of gave a little cautionary guidance, and after hours they were initially down like 7%. Amazon's missed. and they were down a bunch. And I'm like, oh gosh, today's going to be a bloodbath in the market. And then it's up probably, I don't know if it's the biggest day of the year, but it's up, it's close. So
Yeah, personally, I think the market's been so beat up at this point that it's just looking to know that all the bad news is out. And when Apple actually made their earnings and their forecast was fine, it was like, okay, they're not falling apart. So maybe, but I think that we've just had so much bad news for so long. Everyone's just waiting is there another shoe that's going to drop? And it's been like 2 weeks and people realize that. I think there was some other CPI number that came out today that met expectations as opposed to like higher than, or so. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think that's not to go. I don't know. Everybody's paying us for our economic insights, but releasing. They're probably gonna do another rate increase. Like again, like it drives me nuts. Like they have now put the unemployment rate as like the or the jobless claims as like their latest barometer. They're trying to squash out, and we've talked for months. Like there's not enough people working. Our immigration policies and COVID and all these things have just severely limited labor participation rate, and it's a mess. And if that is going to try to squash unemployment, it's going to do some serious damage. So hopefully they get a little smarter and just recognize, all right, yes, inflation's real and we need to address it, but if we're trying to like crush the job market, that's going to be serious. So
and the stock market, yeah. And the thing is, like, because I always make fun of people try to break the stock market. I don't know where it's going to go, but it does relate to the labor market when it gets completely beat up. Because when everyone has less money, when venture capitalists and PE firms have less money, when companies have money, they can't do as much hiring, they can't do as much raises, you have to do layoffs. So even if we think it's hysteria, even if we think it's oversold, it still has an impact, which is why I'm always rooting for it to go up because I work in employment. So
yeah, exactly. It's pretty simple. Anybody who roots for a recession has got way more problems, and there's nothing good about it. So nothing fun. Two old guys who've been through a few. So it's all smooth sailing from here.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to the Talent Insights podcast, part of the Talent Insights series, which is always available for replay on talentinsights.hirewell.com, as well as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon. Everyone out there, thanks for listening. Matt, thanks again for chiming in for this. Glad you're in a talkative mood today. And have a great weekend, everyone.
You get 3 months. Bye.